To start off, I'd like to invite up Fran Katsoudas, our co-host for this morning, Cisco's Executive Vice President and Chief People, Policy, and Purpose Officer. Fran, thanks so much for joining us. This is a timely conversation, I think, especially one I'm excited to talk to you about because Cisco has done so much work in this space. You all have really focused on the connectivity that can help communities thrive. Would love to touch on that, especially because obviously so many AI conversations this week. What are the kinds of things that make communities digitally resilient, especially in this new age of AI?
Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to have this conversation because I think it's so very important for us to always be thinking about how we can drive resilience in communities. And I think what we recognize is that when you have resilience, it allows you to turn disruption into growth. And I think that's what we're driving towards. So what we have seen as we work with communities around the world is that there are, I would say, 4 or 5 key areas that really help to build focus from a resilience perspective. And those areas first are all about people in society. And when we focus there, we focus a lot on education. From a Cisco perspective, we have trained almost 25 million learners around the globe. Last year, we trained 4.7 million. And a lot of that is actually on the African continent as well. And what we find is that when you have that education and that readiness to take on technology, it's a key element of growth. And so that's one key area. I think we see governments working really hard to digitize more and more of their services as it allows more people to have connection and access as well. And so that's another key area. We focus on the environment, of course, and resilience from an environmental perspective. Technology, of course, is a huge element as well. And then lastly, the economy.
That's great. And wanted to double click on a piece of that. Obviously, in your role as Chief People and Purpose Officer, you think a lot about human potential, especially both of your team and of the partners and people that Cisco works with and touches and impacts. You've said that AI can help us become more productive, more creative, and maybe most interesting, more human. Would love for you to share your perspective on how you think technology, especially in this new, really disruptive age, can maybe not replace or distract from human connection, but actually deepen human connection. I feel like that's kind of counterintuitive sometimes.
It kind of is. And so let's think about it from a company perspective, and then it applies, of course, from a community perspective as well. So companies, especially large companies, have always struggled with having multiple modes of reaching out to their employees. And so what you have seen historically is there's one way that companies meet their employees regardless of where they are from a role perspective or from a needs perspective because of the scale. And what we have found is that through data and insights and AI, you now have the ability to be so customized where in a company like Cisco where you have 90,000 employees, you have the ability now to say, okay, I know exactly what you need based on what you've shared, and let me now customize how I reach out to you and the services that we provide. And so it can feel a lot more human. And I think the magic is when you take Gen AI and you start to intersect the human element that someone can really feel seen, whereas in a company of 90,000, they may not.
That's an amazing point. To be able to cut right to that personalized connection is so important. Thinking about our conversation this morning, bringing it back to the next 3 billion, you spend a lot of time with leaders in Africa. I know you spent about 2 months there last year. What are you hearing from those leaders about their own vision for how they can try to connect their communities more?
I think the coolest thing that I hear is whenever I'm talking to leaders across the African continent, the first conversation is all about skills. And I think that's amazing because I think with that level of investment, it is going to mean so much to communities, and not only how they absorb technology, but I think there's a leapfrog there as well. And so that's the first thing that I hear. The second thing that I hear is a lot of interest in how to build smart cities and what that looks like. A lot of worry in some cases around energy, water, some of those really important issues that I know we all think about quite a bit. And then the last thing that I would say, and partially this is because of what Cisco does, but I hear a lot about the fact that as we connect the next 3 billion, we have to be so careful and thoughtful from a security perspective as well. We have a risk that those that have not been connected, once they're connected, will be the most vulnerable as it relates to cyber attacks. And so how do you create these systems that allow access, but also really focus on safe access?
No, absolutely, and I think that's, to go back to something you said earlier, that resilience is both about those skills and capturing that opportunity, but also about protecting against those kinds of risks. Cisco has some really valuable and impactful scale. I know that you all had a goal of connecting and impacting more than 1 billion people globally. You achieved that goal early in 2023, which is really exciting. And last month, you announced a really interesting next big ambition. And that was, tell me if I've got this right, was to really directly impact and connect 40 major important communities around the world. Would love to hear more about that initiative, and especially because you all are thinking about both the scale around the world as well as these communities. How do you think about that intersection between local impact and your global reach?
Yeah, it was interesting. So in 2014, we set the goal to positively impact 1 billion people in 10 years. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. When you're focused on such a large number, it forces you to start to think, like, what are those scale motions that have great impact? And so as you would imagine, it's through partnership, working with NGOs, working as we did on the education piece. And so we learned a lot. And the interesting thing was we audited every single one of the billion. And so we learned a lot in that process. Cisco turned 40 in December of 2024. And we started thinking, okay, what's the next big thing? And so what we decided was that we wanted to focus on 40 communities over the next 10 years. And what we would like to do is focus on those 5 key areas of resilience. We know that every community will be different in their needs. The first community that we selected is actually in the U.S., and it came as a result of Hurricane Helene, which sadly was a really terrible disaster in North Carolina. And so we are hoping that we can be a big part of how that community rebuilds and how we can drive a level of resilience. And so the team right now is going through a really cool process of picking communities around the world where we'll have big impact.
That's really exciting. Well, looking forward to talking to you more about those communities in the coming months and years. You mentioned something I was going to bring up as well, Cisco turning 40. Obviously amazing to have 4 decades of impact around the world. So many of the conversations this week, especially because of the kind of AI moment, are looking to the future, and would love to tap into your crystal ball a little bit. What excites you most as you're closing out those first 40 years of Cisco's legacy? What excites you the most about these next 10 years, this next decade of innovation?
So you have to know that I'm an optimist, and so ignore me for just a moment in my optimism. But I do think that as we look at AI, as we look at where the technology is going, we will have an opportunity to truly touch the 3 billion that are not connected today. I think our hope had been that as the internet continued to grow and scale, that everyone would have access. And sadly, that wasn't the case. I think this is a moment where we can architect. We can architect within companies how we leverage AI to create equality and access, but we can do that more broadly around the world as well. And so I do think there continues to be this democratization that will be there, and opportunities that we see from a Cisco perspective. What we see is that AI requires so much from the network. And so we will have the opportunity to build out what companies will need. But there's also an element of using AI for security and security for AI. And we think that's just going to be a huge opportunity for the technology as well.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And I think to your first point, that democratization of access and opportunity, I think as we close that gap and reduce that 3 billion number, it'll be amazing to see what all the innovation, all the opportunity that comes from around the world. Fran, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thank you.
Appreciate it.